You're entering the MSP Zone, a podcast for the managed services community, covering news, analysis, and interviews from around the globe. Elevate your MSP game by staying in the MSP Zone. And now, your host, Charles Weaver.
All right. Got some brand new gadgets. A Rodecaster Pro 2. That's what I'm recording on today. So if it sounds a little amplified, it is. This is apparently the next greatest iteration of podcast recording technology out there. And I just got it unboxed, and you guys are the first to hear it. So this is the first episode on this new platform, and hopefully it sounds good. It actually sounds a little weird, because apparently you could do a lot of really cool stuff with this, like turn on
strange voice effects.
All right, enough of that. Another time, another place. Today we are talking about M&A, mergers and acquisitions, and who isn't interested in M&A these days? Specifically, though, we're going to be talking about M&A integration advice for managed service providers, because we've been getting a lot of it in the certification program, in the MSP Verify. What I mean by that is we're getting a lot of companies, MSPs, who are going through their certification, and they're talking about M&A application in the certification program, meaning they want to know, all right, I'm going through an acquisition, I'm buying a company, it typically is how it goes, or I'm merging with another company, and we're going to be one of the dominant players. And what we need to know is, how is this acquisition or merger going to impact our certification? That's question number one. Question number two is, how is this acquisition going to help us align the acquiring entity, if I can call it that, the body, the organization that's coming into the buyer? How can this certification help us align controls, align policies, align systems, technologies that may be there may be duplicate technologies. Anyway, all those things are really legitimate questions. They are very legitimate things to be concerned about in an acquisition. And I'll go out here on record saying that a good number of really smart people don't pay enough attention to getting beyond the closing, as I call it. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about post-closing, although some of this stuff could actually be very relevant in the pre-closing elements of your negotiation. How you vet these companies, how you do your due diligence on them. I'm not really going to spend that much time on it. I'm going to be focusing the most of our time together today on the post-close integration of another MSP organization. Now, to be completely fair and honest, this could apply to a non-MSP entity as well. But I'm going to keep it confined to one MSP buying another MSP, because that's a very common situation that a lot of MSP owners find themselves in today. What with all the private equity money flowing freely out there, it's a very common thing. We see it a lot, and here are some kind of best practices or tips, tricks, things that will just make your life a heck of a lot easier. And officially, our Weaver Outrage meter is set to a really, really standard low today. So nobody should get offended. Nobody should get outraged, least of all me. This is just really good, straightforward, helpful advice. At least I hope it is. So let's set the scenario. You are an MSP. You are buying or merging with another MSP. You already know who they are. You've done your financial due diligence, all that fun stuff, and you've gotten to the closing, and everybody and you still like each other. Nobody's everybody's still talking. Checks have cleared, and now you are closing +1. Now, so you've done the deal. The deal's done. You're now XYZ company or whatever you're calling yourself. Now the real work begins. Now you have to integrate. Now you have to plug in this company, this thing that you bought, into presumably an existing company that already exists, or in the case of a merger, you're going to combine, and maybe you're going to be, I think this is personally a lot more common than typically buyers will let on, but they'll say, I think behind the scenes, it will be a lot more picking and choosing which are the best technologies, controls, platforms, the best ways to go about any one given thing. Will be on a case by case basis. Like I see that a lot more frequently than people will admit to. But nevertheless, you are now in the integration planning, and this is where, quite frankly, in my opinion, a lot of M&A deals fall apart. Now, you could be saying, well, wait a minute. You just said the deal was closed. The deal was done. You got to the closing, the checks, the funds cleared and everything. Everybody's still talking. That's it, right? No, it's not it. And that's not what I look at as a metric for M&A success. I think it's a very useful metric, and one that I used to apply when I used to do this type of work is, what are the parties doing? The principals, the buyers and the sellers, the main people involved in the transaction. I don't mean brokers. I don't mean the bankers. I certainly don't mean the financiers. I mean the principals, the buyer and seller principals. How are they getting along? Year 1, year 2. Year 1 after closing, if everyone's still getting along, that's a really good sign. Now, yeah, you could have other financial metrics. You could have, customer retention metrics. You could have employee retention. You can have a number of different ways that you monitor the overall success of that deal. Completely fine. I have no problem with that. One of the meters I think is really helpful are the principals still getting along. Now, if one of the principals was like only around for 3 months, and that was contractually, everybody knew that, and they were leaving, that's a separate issue. I'm talking if the goal was to have the main principals, the sellers, involved, staying on long-term for at least a year or more, if they're still getting along, if they're still talking to one another, that is a really, really critical element of whether the deal was successful or not. And it will also be, in my opinion, a fairly good indicator of whether or not in that 1 year, let's say, that there has been a free flow of information and that the integration was actually taking place as planned. Now, this, of course, assumes that you have an integration plan. In my experience, very few M&A deals involving managed service providers actually have a fully baked post-closing integration plan. So for those of you out there taking notes, I hope you are, take out your pencil, your favorite stylus, open up your Surface Pro, your iPad, or whatever you use to note take these days. Step number 1, develop and have an integration plan, a post-closing integration plan. What does that mean? Yes, it certainly means the financial systems. Those are the things that are like obvious. The immediate 30-day closing deal items, that checklist that you need to have, right? The appropriate bank accounts are being shut down and transferred. Checks and incoming wires are going to the right bank account. Payments are coming from the right bank account. Vendors are still getting paid. Employees are getting paid, right? These are no-brainer things, but they typically are the ones that get the most attention, and for obvious reasons. People's paychecks are still coming out. People's benefits are still active, things like that. I would call those things HR, financial type of controls and processes that are fairly obvious and typically get the most attention. What doesn't get the most attention typically, because it doesn't really involve in the first 30 days an immediate change. And that would be all of the monitoring, management, networking systems, applications, and technologies that the parties use typically don't get messed with in the first 30 days by design, because typically they don't want to know. They're not going to make value judgments on, are we changing this? Are we leaving this? Are we going to standardize on this backup tool? Or are we going to use the backup tool the buyer has always used? Those types of things typically don't get decided in 30 days. You may have discussions. You may start to have conversations about where you're leaning, but typically you don't start to see customers deprovision from a backup tool in the first 30 days. Sometimes you do, but typically you don't. But my main point is you got to have a plan. You got to have a plan that you start in that first 30 days that says, okay, now we're one single entity, or we're going to be a single entity by this date. Do we need 2 backup platforms? If no, which one are we going to take? Who are the customers that are going to be most impacted if we move off of this platform to this platform? And that type of conversation needs to take place. And some of it's going to be legitimate customer service, type of dialogue. Some of it's going to be, what do the technicians prefer? And that's important too, but eventually someone with authority is going to have to make a hard decision of, no, we're gonna leave this product behind and we're gonna move over to this platform. This is gonna be our standard platform for backup, or this is what we're gonna use for ticketing, or this is what we're gonna use for this. And those things need to be ironed out pretty quickly so that you can develop and implement, execute your integration plan, which is, if not in 30 days, pretty soon thereafter, you have a very good idea of what are you keeping and what are you throwing away. Assuming you want this deal to make financial sense for you, most deals don't involve just accumulating duplicate versions of everything that you have, unless you got so lucky that you bought another MSP that had the identical same network stack that you do. Sometimes can happen, but typically it doesn't. You will want to know what you're keeping and what you're tossing aside. That's going to involve things like termination, vendor notice, termination penalties, and all that fun stuff. But you're going to need to have a plan. That's on the technology side, right? Your RMM, your ticketing, your backup, your security, all that stuff. Financial, invoicing, quoting, proposals, all that. Then you need to, that's at a threshold level. That stuff is pretty surface level. Hey, this is going to impact our cost. We're moving from this vendor to this vendor because it's cheaper. We have more licenses, better buying power with this vendor A versus vendor B. Those types of things will go into your integration planning for tool selection. Next, and this is really critical, and this is number 2, you are going to get into and need to have a plan that does impact the process and the controls that you plan to use post integration What do I mean by that? It doesn't just mean we're using vendor A versus vendor B for backup. What I mean is the MSP, let's say NewCo, right? The resulting company after the deal. Is the company going to continue with the daily backup schedule? Is the daily backup schedule going to continue to go to vendor X cloud network, or is it going to go to vendor Y, their cloud network? How much storage are you going to keep? Who's going to be responsible for checking those backups? Because the person that used to do that backup, I don't know, maybe they quit, maybe they are redundant, maybe they're no longer going to be with the company. Maybe the company is going to keep everybody, hopefully, in a best case scenario, everybody from both sides is going to stay on board because the organization needs the bodies. But there's going to have to be a reshuffling, a reorganization of titles and roles and responsibilities. And so who is the person responsible for checking those daily backup logs for the MSP backups, right? Those are process control related decisions that you're going to have to sort out. And when you are going, and now some of you are saying, whoa, this is way too deep, man. I wanted to bulk up and buy an MSP so I can get rich and retire early. Man, that's why I did the deal. Well, that's fine, but you still need to think about this stuff because trust me, when it comes to who's doing your validation of your internal backup logs, if you've not thought about it, believe me, when it comes time for your MSP Verify audit, and we're asking you for evidence of how do you, it says here that you back up your internal backup every day. Okay, well, how do you check it? Well, it says here that this person over in this department is responsible for validating that. And once a month, it says here in your policy that you do a periodic random restore of a file just to make sure that it's functioning. Okay, well, this person got moved over to that department. They don't exist anymore. So who's the new person doing it? Right. Those are the things. Those are the changes that you're going to have a plan pretty soon after closing. You're going to have a plan for how do those things get impacted. And what I'm really getting at here is you better have this stuff written down someplace at a control level. Meaning that, and that's one of many, many examples. I could have examples of, do you still have 3 tiers in your help desk, in your NOC or your SOC? Are those levels still in place? Are the people in those 3 levels still the same? Have they changed? Has the process for escalation of a ticket changed now that maybe you changed ticketing platforms? Maybe the acquiring party has a very different platform than you do, and so there's a different way that you have to do this, right? Everything that you do from a service delivery standpoint, number one, ought to be documented. But when you're going through an acquisition integration, you'd really better make sure that you understand what, if anything, is changing, so that when the auditors come in and they ask you for that all-important evidence, proof that you're actually doing it the way you say you're doing it, that you have accounted for all of those micro changes, micro integration changes that have taken place post-closing that are now impacting your service delivery. Because what you don't want to be is facing that audit team. You just told them that this is how you do something, and then they ask you for proof, and then you say, oh, we don't do it this way anymore. So that person no longer exists. They're over here. They don't have access to that system anymore. And then you scramble. And then that creates delay. That creates panic. That creates, that's not a good sign. And so having a having a good handle on your policies and procedures, and this is assuming if you're an MSP Verify company, you already have this. What I'm talking about now is the change control process, the impact of changes to those service delivery documents that will make a very big difference between you having a heck of a time, a difficult time in digesting or integrating this company that you bought or merged with versus you having a far easier time because you know exactly where the internal backup policy document resides and you know exactly what that looks like, and you can go to your integration, your merger, your acquisition company and say, here's the decision we have to make. We're going to use this platform and this is our current model. Can we work within this model? And you work together and you come to a conclusion. You say, yeah, this can actually work. And guess what? Maybe it doesn't change the documentation at all, or maybe it changes it a little bit, but now you know where it is. And now moving forward, you have a very accurate documentation of your internal backup process. And guess what? You can evidence it. You can actually show screenshots from the right system. And the person who's responsible for that can be immediately notified when their audit time comes around. And they're going to be told, hey, go grab the screenshots from these dates to this date, and we'll evidence our internal backup. Boom, done. Move on to the next thing. Patch management, right? And on and on and on you go. And if you start with that baseline of having your controls, your policies, procedures, and your process documented, you will, trust me, folks, you will significantly improve your stress. You will lower your stress level, and you will increase the efficiency at which you integrate this new company that you just bought or merged with. And you will make it a lot easier on yourself. You will make it a lot easier on that other team that you're working with now. And they will understand. And especially this happens quite frequently when the company that you're buying, let's say, maybe has a less efficient, less matured process than you did. There's a lot of the stuff that they may be saying, wow, we never did it that way. We never were that fancy or that automated or that documented in our process. And it actually could help the acquisition or merger group to understand what the expectations are from a service deliverer. Remember, due diligence almost never gets beyond a very surface level skim of the technology involved in the target company, meaning that you're going to look at just the baseline stuff. For most of the due diligence is really focused around financials. It's really focused around contracts, on customers, on vendors. That's where the focus is. No one is doing a deep dive of your service delivery capabilities at the target level. And that's why typically you will see only after the closing and when you're neck deep in integration, that's when you're going to start to see, especially when there's a disparity of some amount between the buyer and the seller, where one party is being brought up to the current level of service delivery. When you have your documentation together, it's going to make it a lot easier. If you don't have it, it's going to make it a lot harder. Trust me on that. I've seen that firsthand. It can get ugly, or it can be really simple and really beautiful thing to witness when you got all your ducks in a row. So that's my kind of highlights. Having an integration plan, having your baseline documentation, understanding beyond the financial, beyond the HR, beyond the core things that are going to get all the attention in the post-closing days and weeks after the deal's closed. Having the service, I'll call it service delivery integration. And that means, again, the systems, the technology, applications, includes vendors, yeah, the policies, the procedures, the process, essentially, and the individual controls that are going to be impacted. All of those things ought to be documented. Yeah, even controls ought to be documented. And if you're, if you're wondering how the heck do you do that, well, start with a spreadsheet. Start with a spreadsheet and start writing down what your controls are. And if you're lucky enough and you go through an MSP Verify and maybe you get a SOC 2 along with that, we can actually give you your controls and you can have them documented within your own system. And so you'll know what they are and you can keep them updated. And that's a very useful thing. That's more of an intermediate or advanced MSP practice. But even startup MSPs ought to start at some point documenting controls. Have those things written down and have a plan, meaning that you've got, and this is kind of number 3, and this is more of a, I guess a project management tip. Have a system in place that will allow you to do that integration without it being pandemonium. What I mean is, what you don't want to do is have a pitched battle between 2 managed services delivery teams, putting them in the room and saying, all right, fight it out, and whoever the last person standing is, they win. That is not an integration strategy. That's mayhem. What you want is someone who's going to take leadership, take control, and say, all right, I'm responsible for integrating our managed services integration. Here's what we're going to do. And then they have a plan. And they don't have an outcome, right? They don't know what the outcome is going to be, but they have a plan of, all right, we're going to start with this, and we're going to go through a methodology of integrating applications, technologies, people, roles, and all of that. And it's not going to be overnight, but someone or a group of people has the responsibility to achieve that goal. And that goal being achieved will, trust me, folks, record this, memorize this, keep this in your memory banks, because this is the important stuff. Having that process of a post-closing integration plan ready to implement and fully implemented within a reasonable amount of time. In fact, the sooner the better, because the longer you let that continue, for a variety of other reasons we don't have time to get into today, it will be a lot more difficult for you to do the integration. Personalities, bad habits, things like that sink in, and a lot of other political, personal reasons that I've seen that just make it a lot more difficult, more messy to do the integration. The faster you do it, the better you do it. The better it will happen generally. All these things will make your M&A experience infinitely better. Infinitely better. It will make the stickiness of the people, the employees, and the customers a lot better, because they will witness an efficient process growing, becoming better, becoming more defined. And with the acquisition, the target company, let's say that they're assimilating or being assimilated into the acquiring party's process, procedures, controls, etc. Then you will see, their customers, their employees really begin to have structure, definition, and all the good things that go along with it. And by the way, I am not saying that a target company can't have as good or sometimes even better policies, procedures, and controls than the company that bought them. I have seen that many times as well. So don't be so arrogant that you think, we're the buying company, so our process should be the one that wins. Not always true. Not at all true. Pick the best ones. It should be which which entity has the best thing. And maybe the one party has, the seller party has a better process for backups, right? But the buying party has a better process for patch management or change control. You're going to have to take each one, on an individual basis, have a process, have a plan for how you're going to go about that deliberation, who is ultimately responsible for making those decisions, and then getting those things implemented after the decision has been made. When you go through that, you will then infinitely improve your odds of having a good M&A experience. Your customers will have a much better experience. Your new customers that you just purchased will have a better experience. They will be more likely to stay with you. The same with the people that work for the company that you bought. And if you're paying attention and you want to do this more than once, and let's face it, what MSP out there is not wanting to do more, M&A deals? A lot of them do. This is a plan that can be repeated. And when you do it a couple times, you will become good at it. And your integration and assimilation of these targets will become better. And it won't become a chaotic situation. It will become a very smooth machine that will produce results. It will produce that accretive growth that you are hopefully looking for in acquisitions. And that's why a lot of MSPs do that. You will thank yourselves for going through this process. And I know it takes a little bit of time, a little bit of patience, but that's our experience, having seen this happen so many times for 15 plus years. It has to start with your own internal documentation, being there, being present, and it will produce magic for you. Believe me, it will produce wonders. Well, that's my advice for today. I hope you enjoyed the new snappy audio technology we're laying out for you here today. If you have questions, feel free to send us an email at mspzone@mspalliance.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to be on the program and talk about your own M&A experience, we would love to have you on as well. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you will get notified when future episodes are released. We will see you next time in the MSP Zone.